All right, thanks for tuning in to another edition of the OFN Meeting Room as we talk Detroit Lions football. And before we do that, I want to remind everybody the Our Draft Guide right here. Order the Our Draft Guide still, even though the draft is over. That doesn't matter. I mean, there's so much info in here. You have a lot of time on your hands. Well, hopefully you don't, but we know you do. So this is a great opportunity to catch up on that time. Find out now you know which players are on your team. So now you can check out the profiles of those players, not just the players that were drafted, but free agents as well. And we'll talk about a couple of those rookie free agents that the Lions picked up in just probably a little bit later as we wind down the show. But let's get started with Jeff Risdon of at the Lions Wire at USA Today. Jeff, thanks for taking your time out to talk to us again.
It is my pleasure to be back with you. Thanks for having me.
All right, Jeff. So, and by the way, I also want to promote your podcast because we didn't really get a chance to do that last time. And we were talking off the air about it, how cool it is that you've got like the only YouTube podcast with like Detroit Lions with the team name represented, which is just awesome.
Yeah, it's the Detroit Lions podcast. It sprung from Reddit. I do it with my friends Chris and Case. We've been doing it for 4 years now. It gets a very good reception. You can tune in as DET Lions Podcast on Twitter and also on YouTube. We record at least once a week. During the season, we pick it up a little bit more. But for now, it's that's where it's at, and we get great response on the video. Yes. So thanks for watching.
And again, all you have to do is when you type it in actually YouTube, you could just go Detroit Lions podcast. You might even be able to just go Detroit Lions, and your podcast would probably be on the front page.
That would be really cool if it was on the front
page. It could
be.
I haven't checked it out, but I think that's possible. All right, let's talk about before we get into the draft itself and we detail each player, the fan response from the draft.
By and large, it's been pretty favorable. I think once people got into their heads that it wasn't going to be Chase Young at number 3 and that it wasn't going to be Tua Tagovailoa at 3 or 5, I think fans are pretty happy with Jeff Okudah. They have gotten a little bit more. So they're being in Michigan and drafting an Ohio State player, and they drafted 3 of them. Can test some patience for some people. As you know, there's a big rift between Ohio and Michigan.
Just a little one.
Little bit. I'm from the Cleveland area. I live in Michigan. I've lived here for 18 of the last 22 years. Married to a Michigan woman, so I get both sides of it, and I see it. But once the players get to the NFL,
once they graduate, it's in the past.
Yeah, you got to put it behind you. And I think people are doing that now with Jeff Okudah, and they're seeing, my goodness, we got a fantastic football player. We got the best cornerback that's come along in a few years. And that's been a near overwhelming response. And that's very, very encouraging to see because he is exactly what they wanted for an outside cornerback. He can press. He can play off a little bit. He tackles. He attacks the ball. He anticipates routes. He understands things very well. He's a home run pick. And I think most fans are pretty happy with it. Letting Darius Slay go was not an easy or popular move. He was the most popular player on the Detroit Lions, even more so than Matthew Stafford. He was a very engaging guy with the fans. He loved Detroit, and Detroit loved him back, but it didn't end well. So there's a natural tendency that now, okay, we don't have Slay anymore, so we're replacing him with this guy. And that it's not easy to be that guy. But I think Okudah's personality and I think the way that he goes about his business is going to help him there. I think he will be received just fine once they start playing football.
Yeah, we talked about the fact that cornerback was going to be one of the top priorities when we did the draft preview a few weeks ago, and that Okudah was, I would say, he was like on 90% of the draft boards, give or take.
Yeah.
You know, I thought it was between Okudah or maybe Derek Brown. I kind of felt the same. I felt Carolina and Detroit was I thought it could be either way. You know, it could be Derek Brown 3, Okudah maybe he falls to whatever it was, 8 or 9.
To 7, absolutely.
Or vice versa.
We felt the same way. Yeah, it was one of those deals, and if they had traded out of 3 and they tried and didn't get any takers for it, Derek Brown was a much more realistic option had they traded back, especially if they fell back to 7, 8, 9, that range. Because I don't think Okudah would have lasted that long, and I think they would have been very happy with Derek Brown. But they're happier with Jeff Okudah.
Were the fans 50-50, or would they prefer Okudah over Brown?
honestly, the fans really wanted Isaiah Simmons.
Ah, they wanted, yeah. They
The
fans when there's that type of player that doesn't come around very often, and there's always that niche
right.
player in the draft, and fans
Yeah.
just gravitate towards those guys.
And one of the things that I've been trying to preach is that they already have him on the team. They signed him in this offseason as Jamie Collins. He is the athletic
There you
freak
go.
who can play outside linebacker. He can rush. He's the best coverage linebacker in football, according to Pro Football Focus, and the eye test validates that. He's a super freak athlete. He's got a 42-inch vertical. And remember, he played defensive tackle at Southern Mississippi at 250 pounds and dominated. Simmons is a fantastic athlete. He would have been superfluous for the team. I think most people begrudgingly accept that now and realize that, you know what, the depth chart with Jeff Okudah looks a lot better at cornerback than had they taken Simmons or Brown and stuck Desmond Trufant as the number one cornerback and
Oh yeah.
hope that a guy like Amani Oruwariye, who was the 5th round pick last year and actually played pretty well down the stretch and will be the number 3 outside cornerback this year. He doesn't need to be the 2.
Yes.
Picking Okudah puts everybody where they belong on the depth chart in the secondary. It's a very good secondary. It's one of the best in the league. They're built around it. That's what Matt Patricia, the head coach, wants. He loves the coverage sack. We talked about that in the pre-draft show. And he's got the guy that can get it done for him.
Yeah, because Okudah is not only going to be a day one starter, but when you take a player like that at that spot, you do have the hopes of him being an immediate top tier player, somebody that is going to almost be from day one a shutdown corner. And he's a rookie. He'll go through a few things, bumps and issues. But for the most part, if you got it, you got it. And if they got their guy, it is so important to have a lockdown corner in the NFL. Boy, I mean, as a Jet fan, having Darrelle Revis there for the years they had him.
That'll spoil you. My
goodness.
Yes,
yeah. It just takes one side of the field off, and it makes life easier for everybody else. What do you think about Swift in the second round? Was that surprising they went to running back in the second round? Not surprising they took a running back, but surprising that they went with Swift in round 2.
I was a little surprised that they went running back that early because they had approached free agency knowing that they needed a running back. Kerryon Johnson is a good player. He can't stay healthy, and they needed somebody who could take over those carries. Bo Scarborough was very nice at the end of last year. Ty Johnson actually did quite well as a rookie speed back, and the fact that they added one so early goes against the grain because they were looking at sort of the lower budget free agents. They didn't chase the big names. And the fact that they went out and got the big name in DeAndre Swift, who was the second running back off the board, coming at number 35 overall, it was surprising. Most of us expected them to take a defensive tackle, pass rush.
Was there a specific player that was on the board that the fans wanted?
There was a good mix, honestly. There was quite a few different directions they could have gone. A lot of people were looking at not cornerback, but wide receiver there.
Okay.
And, some of the players that they really wanted, guys like Brandon Ayuk, T. Higgins, they were gone already, so I understand why they did that. Taking running back there, it's an interesting value for them. It signifies that they really do want to run the ball under Darrell Bevell.
Yes.
They ran the ball successfully for Detroit successfully last year. They broke 4 yards per carry for the first time since 2013, and did that with an offensive line that wasn't necessarily geared for it. And we'll get into the offensive line because that's a big part of what they're going to do with the run too. They address that heavily. But Swift reminds me some of Amir Abdullah, and a guy who's an outside-in runner in college who thinks he's probably a little bit faster than he is. Now, I will say this for Swift. Swift attacks the holes better north and south than Amir Abdullah ever did. And that's going to do well for him. He's a good complement to what they want to do. But he has the talent to be a full-time lead back. And look, it's Matt Patricia, it's Darrell Bevell. They always run running back by committee. They will have one favored guy, but the others also play. Swift will be the guy who plays the most. That's not a slight at Kerryon Johnson. It's the reality that he's been hurt 2 years in a row, and really 5 years in a row, going back to college. They like him, but they needed help, and they got it in DeAndre Swift. It wouldn't have been the pick that I would have taken. I would have waited a little bit on running back personally, but I understand why they did it, and they're very excited to have him. We did a couple of press conferences with GM Bob Quinn and head coach Matt Patricia since then. They both just talked about how he can really be the centerpiece for their run, ground and pound offense is essentially what they're going for.
Yeah, well, we talked about that as well on the preview show, how the team itself, the identity of the team, with the Patriot ties, that gets old.
Yeah.
But GM, head coach, and now Bevel, we want to be more physical up front. We want to run the football. And that only makes Matthew Stafford better. It only makes the whole offense better.
Right.
It doesn't put everything on Matthew Stafford. So, yeah, and who knows? I don't know if they thought Swift would be there. Some people thought it was a possibility. Swift could have been a mid-first round guy. He wasn't even the first running back taken. So that might have been a little bit of a surprise.
Yeah. Also, there was a Midwest bias there. We all watched, being in Michigan, we watched J.K. Dobbins. We watched Jonathan Taylor a lot. The Big Ten's omnipresent here. So Midwestern fans were like, let's take the Midwestern guy. We saw those guys. We don't get a lot of Georgia football up here, surprisingly enough.
Well,
so
now you got an Auburn and a Georgia back.
Yes. Funny how that works. And an Alabama one.
Yeah, there you go. 3 SEC backs.
Yeah. So I think there was a little bit of shock in that Jonathan Taylor was probably the fan favorite for the pick if they were going running back. Well, people will warm up to Swift. The fact that he maximizes carries very well. He's a guy that if the blocking is going to give him 3, he's going to get the 3. And that's not always true of the other backs, and certainly not true of Kerryon Johnson. He's a guy who will try to bounce that out and will occasionally make what could be a 4-yard gain into a 1-yard gain. He'll make them into 10 too. But Swift is a good schematic fit for what they're trying to do with Darrell Bevell in terms of controlling the time of possession, controlling the line of scrimmage. He's a guy that can attack that. He's an aggressive runner. He's got some violence to him. He's got some balance through contact, which is something that's very important to the scheme and to the players themselves. So I think it's a decent fit.
Okay, round 3, 2 picks. Let's start with Julian Okwara. Another Okwara on the Lions.
Got 2 of them now. He joins his brother Romeo.
Yeah,
Romeo and Julian. Their parents had something going on.
That's right. That's pretty awesome. Though it's a nice story.
It is.
What did you think? I mean, and this was also a need. We knew that the team needed to get more pass rushing presence up front.
Definitely.
So how does he fit?
He is different than his brother, and I think that's the first thing that Lions fans are going to have to get used to is that Romeo is a much more physical in-line presence. Julian is a stand-up guy. He's going to play the jack linebacker role, sort of the rush hybrid outside linebacker defensive end role that Devon Kennard played. He's filling that role basically. Okay. There's some question as to how much that role will still exist because they are changing their defense a little bit, where you're going to see more 4-man fronts. But he's going to be that guy who's rushing from the tight end side primarily. Often standing up outside of Trey Flowers. And he can do that. He can also stand up outside of his brother. He needs to get tougher. He needs to get stronger. But you can see the bend. You can see the physicality that he wants to play with. He just doesn't have the full strength for it yet. He does have some pass rush moves. I saw him in person a couple of times. I live fairly close to Notre Dame. I get the privilege of watching just about all of their games. He's a good player. He belonged where he went in the 3rd round. It's good value for him because it doesn't put the expectations too high. If you take a pass rusher higher than that, and he's not an instant sizzle 10-sack guy. He's not TJ Watt. That's not what you're getting here. You're getting a guy who's going to be a designated pass rush specialist probably until he learns to play a little bit more through contact. He's a guy who will try to run around blocks rather than go through them, and that's something that he'll have to learn how to do. But having his brother with him gives him some familiarity.
Yes.
It's they're going to live together, which is great.
Sure.
He will fit into the locker room very well. He understands the concept of defense. Brian Kelly is a yeller. Matt Patricia is a yeller, so I don't think that the coaching shock is going to be there for him. Some people take issue with having coaches being in your face and degrading you. Um, he's used to that
That's
from Brian
important.
Kelly.
Yep. That's
Yes. And that's not necessarily a criticism of Kelly or
no, no,
Patricia.
no,
It's
no.
just the way they
Yep.
are. That's
Oh, what
and
about the broken leg? Because the production
yeah,
obviously wasn't there uh, last
yeah,
year as opposed to before the broken leg. So is that also something? And then the shortened OTAs that
yeah.
it's
And
probably
that's where
going to
having
be almost like a red shirt for him.
yeah, I would not expect him to play a great deal. I do think they'll get him into the game in pass rush situations. I think they want to spoon feed him as much as they can get him. It's a third round pick. They've actually had pretty good luck with third rounders. That late day two guys, they have a pretty good grasp of how to bring those guys along and let them do what they want to do. They've had Kenny Galladay, Tracy Walker, even Kerryon Johnson for that matter. They weren't they weren't required to be instant impact. They were allowed to grow and develop. But I think they have a pretty good idea that that's what they're going to have to do with Julian Okwara too.
All right, now let's talk about the next two players. Very interesting. Both guards, Jonah Jackson in the third round from Ohio State, Logan Stenberg in the fourth round from Kentucky. And interesting because both players, at least in the Lads draft guide, had sixth round grades and went early, both of them. Now, both of them had,
Yeah.
if you're just talking about college, they both had successful college careers. They, especially Jackson, me being a Rutgers guy, it hurt Rutgers when he went to Ohio State, and he made a difference with the Buckeyes, and he seamlessly worked along that offensive line for Ohio State and did a good job. I was surprised that Jackson was considered a sixth round guy, knowing what he did in college, and even Stenberg. But I'm sure there's some reasons and limitations that our lads believes that maybe those guys should have went a little bit further down, but doesn't matter what our lads thinks, matters what Detroit thinks. So what about Detroit's feelings on those two guys and the fans?
So Jackson was fairly popular because this team let Graham Glasgow go in free agency. They're starting right guard. Well, they run a guard rotation, and it looks like they will continue to do that because they brought Kenny Wiggins back. They brought Ode Ibushi back. And Joe Dahl. Those were their top three guards entering the draft. So they needed at least one, and they got one in Jackson. I think Jackson is going to take over as a starting left guard. He's a pass rush specialist, although that puts him into a box that isn't necessarily accurate. And you would know this from watching him at Rutgers. He's a good run blocker. He's not a great run blocker. He will reliably seal a hole open, and I think that's all they really want him to do in the run game. He is there to protect Matthew Stafford and keep him upright.
Yeah, he's a physical player.
Yes, he is. He will be an aggressive player in pass protection. Stenberg even more so. I didn't get the Stenberg pick. I'm much more in line with the Arlad's guide here. I thought he was a sixth or seventh round guy. He physically he's a phone booth player, and the league is not a phone booth league anymore. He is a street fighter of a guard, and I think they're going to play him a lot to set the tone. Dominic Raiola was a very popular player in Detroit for a long time, and Stenberg brings that mentality where he's going to pick a fight with the Wisconsin band. That's the kind of guy that he is. He led the SEC in penalties, and he earned them. He's very good at what he does, but it's a very limited repertoire of what he does well.
Okay,
and I think you're going to see some run pass situational blocking. It's weird to think about the Lions liking not having continuity, but when we talked to Matt Patricia and the new offensive line coach Hank Fraley down at the Senior Bowl, they were both like, yeah, we like this rotation. We thought it worked very well, and we're going to continue to do it. So Stenberg sort of fits in as the physical tone setter. When they need to get 2 yards and a cloud of dust, he's going to be the guy who's trying to grind the guy in front of him into the dust. And Jackson should play a lot. He actually reminds me some of Graham Glasgow, so I think that's a pretty good fit. He can play center if you absolutely have to. They don't really need that though. But with Frank Ragnow in the middle at center, and he's great. He's been fantastic in his first 2 years. They have the ability to really maul on the interior line. And I think that's something that's very appealing. It's something that DeAndre Swift can work off of. It makes Bo Scarborough as a power back that much more effective. So I understand the rationale for it. Jackson was a little bit of a reach, but I think most fans are pretty good with that. Stenberg coming from Kentucky, and people saying that he had, I think it was 14 penalties last year.
Wow, that's high.
He also, I think he had 8 or 9 declined. He's one of those guys where he's going to hold you. He's not going to let you get to the quarterback, but if you beat him, he's going to hold you and take you down. He's going to be an interesting sell. It's going to fascinating to see how this plays out because where they took him, you normally play when you're a fourth round guard, and they traded up to get him a little bit too.
Wow,
so
that's true.
Yeah, that one's a bit of a tough sell. That if you ask Lions fans now, that's probably the least popular pick of their draft.
Okay.
But they're willing to look. Detroit loves the fighters. We got the statue of the fist downtown coming at you.
And he is a gritty
Stenberg
player.
Embraces that.
Yes.
So he could fit in with that. He fits in with the whole bad boys mentality that the Pistons used to have. So if he can do that, he will endear himself to some fans, even if he does. If he can't move, as I'll say this, as Dan Shaka told me, if you ever get the 2x4 out of his butt, he's going to be a really good player. It's just a matter of getting it out there.
I like it. Dan can be colorful at times with his analysis on players, but that's what you love about Dan. Exactly. Yes. And I'm sure the first time a touchdown is called back from a Logan Stenberg holding call, that will hopefully be the last time. But
let's hope.
All right, let's talk about the 5th round guys because Quintez Cephus. Now, here's a guy that I was surprised was looked at as a real late guy. Could have been a 6th or a 7th rounder. 5th was about right because I know he didn't. He was gone from football and he had the off the field stuff for a year.
Right.
But last year when I watched him play. And even watched him play pretty well in the Rose Bowl. There was some big games Wisconsin had last year, and I generally liked what I saw. I thought that he was going to be another one of these talented receivers that made this part of a really talented receiver class. Guys like Cephus that you could get later on. Jason Huntley from New Mexico State's intriguing. He's not in the draft guide, but he excelled at a low level pretty much of FBS football, whether it's Sun Belt or independent. So, and a guy that could be that helped a pretty bad football team do a lot on offense, Huntley. So now 5th round, again, maybe a little high for a kid like Huntley. But Cephus, I think, is the one that I think out of the two that I'd be more intrigued with.
Yeah, and it was a little bit high for Cephus. He ran a 4.73 at the combine.
Yeah, that was how did he do that? I mean, that was saying something wrong. Did he trip or what?
No, he didn't. He's not a sprinter. His game is not predicated on speed. He loaded, I think it was 4.58. I want to say at Wisconsin's Pro Day is what got hand timed.
Okay,
which is still not great, but it's better.
Oh yeah, 4.75 is pretty bad.
Yeah, so but he's not a speed guy, and that's not what the Lions need him for. The Lions have a type. Bob Quinn has a type at receiver. He's got Marvin Jones. He's got Kenny Golladay on the outside. Cephus fits in with those guys. They're contested catch mavericks. They are physical. They're big. They're strong. They run good routes. That's something that you see with Cephus on tape consistently is that he has, for being a slow guy, he has good agility. He has good hips. He has decent feet. He can get himself open, presents himself as a target very well. I think they're going to use him in the slot as sort of a big slot. That's a role that they haven't really had. If you think of what Eric Decker was back in the day, in his heyday, that's the kind of receiver that they are hoping they got with Cephus. And that would be good because Eric Decker, criminally underappreciated talent. Guy was a really good player for several years before his body just gave out. He was not a guy who relied on speed either. I think he was a 4.55 guy. If they can get that out of him, that's fantastic. Because remember, this is a team that does not have a receiver under contract after 2020 other than Quintez Cephus. We all assume they're going to extend Kenny Golladay, and that's just a matter of time. But they had to get somebody in. He's a different type of receiver than we thought they would get, but I think people are pretty open-minded about it. One thing in his favor, he played really, really well against both Michigan and Michigan State. again, there's a lot of crossover between the Big Ten fan base and the Detroit Lions fan base, and for him to play very well in those games, he absolutely torched Michigan State. Actually showed the ability to get open down the field against them, so that doesn't hurt him.
And he was their clear number one target in the passing game, which is not easy to do. Because when you're the only wide receiver that is basically going to beat you, you have to find a way. And especially when you don't run a blazing time. So the fact that he was consistently in big games able to come up and play against the opposition's top DBs and still produce, I think those are the things that sometimes you take a look at the overall the combine numbers, and you say, but you know what? There are always going to be players that just don't test well, but they're football players.
Right. And going back to the combine, Jeff Okudah called him the toughest player that he had to guard at the combine. So he had a little bit of an endorsement from the first round pick already 2 days later.
And Huntley, how does he fit in?
Huntley is interesting because he is very redundant with Ty Johnson, who played very well last year coming out of Maryland. He's a fast guy. He's a 4.37 guy. He is water bug quick, lightning. I see him playing the role of third down back, scat back, slot receiver. The Lions had J.D. McKissick in that role last year. He's going to take that role over. McKissick was a college wide receiver. They used him more out of the backfield as a run and gadget type player. And you could also see Huntley take over the return specialists. Jamal Agnew has been on thin ice since his All-Pro rookie year. He just hasn't ever lived up to it since. I think that's Huntley's key to getting on the field this year is probably special teams. Now, long term, he could emerge as that speed back. I'll be honest, I haven't been able to watch a lot of him yet. There's just not a lot of New Mexico State football that's out there and available.
Okay, I know.
I did watch him play against Central Michigan. Central Michigan's defense was wretched, and he made them look that way. So it didn't really show me a lot.
Well, he's got and somebody that's going to need an opportunity to play against the big boys as much as possible. So
right, and apparently he was at, I believe it was the NFLPA collegiate game, and impressed there. The Lions did think enough of him that Bob Quinn went to the pro day at New Mexico State, so that probably should have tipped us off that maybe they were looking that way.
Yes.
But it was earlier than we expected, and to double up on running back when we weren't sure that they were going to take a running back, that was an interesting one, and there's an unknown commodity there, and I hope that Huntley, for his sake, comes along quickly because Detroit will not tolerate wasting a pick like that. On what would be considered a luxury pick when they already have Ty Johnson playing that exact same role.
Yep. Big draft, if you think about it.
That's an iffy one. That's an iffy pick for Bob Quinn. Hopefully it works out. And again, I need to watch more of Huntley before I can talk intelligently about what he's really going to offer. But it seems like there is some school of thought that he will wind up being the replacement slot receiver for Danny Amendola in 2021, and that wouldn't surprise me either.
Really? Okay.
We'll see.
He's like you said, he's kind of small, but if he could just get his hands on the ball.
He's 5'9". He does catch the ball out of the backfield. His numbers say that, and the videos that I've seen of him do show that he does have very good hands, and it's more than just a go over here and catch a swing pass type of receiver. He actually can run a little bit, so that might be his future.
Okay. And then what about the last two picks, both being defensive tackles, Penasini from Utah and Cornell from Ohio State?
Penasini is exciting. He is a guy who resets the line of scrimmage backwards. He does not go backwards when guys come at him. If you're a Lions fan and you want to see him at his best, watch him against Washington, and their center Nick Harris, who's a 5th-round pick of the Browns. He's an agility-based center, and Penasini just destroyed him. And there were a couple of other smaller mobile centers, and Penasini just had his way with them. He's not a pass rusher. He might stumble into a half a sack in his career. That's just not what he does. But he is the replacement for Damon Snacks Harrison, who was the best case scenario of the small school guy done well. Penasini isn't that big, and he's not as shifty, not as athletic as Snacks was. But he's that kind of guy. He's going to be the nose tackle. He's going to play 20 to 30, maybe 40% of the snaps. That's his role. And I think he'll be very good at it. I was very impressed with him. I watched a great deal of Utah football. Their entire
Oh
defense
yeah,
from last year will be in
tremendous.
the NFL in one
Yes,
form or another.
yes.
And he was a linchpin for that. So I'm very, very pleased with that pick. That was a need. It was an underappreciated need. And he fits exactly what they wanted in that middle. So getting him there, I think, was a great pick.
Yeah, Arlad's
Just
actually along the lines of what
yeah,
you were saying. His style of play, his body, and his smarts make him an incredibly effective player on running downs.
yeah, and that's where they're going to use him. They want to control the middle of the field. They have made a concerted effort to upgrade their middle of the field defense this year, bringing in a guy like Jamie Collins, trading for Duron Harmon at safety, and adding Danny Shelton. They got tougher up the middle, and he fits that bill very nicely.
Okay, and then the kid from Ohio State.
Yeah, so Jayshon Cornell, tough to find him on Ohio State tape because they are so talented. He played behind Bosa, he played behind Young. I mean, there's table scraps there, so he's not always playing against the starters. He's functional. I understand why they did it. He fits in. There are connections between the Ohio State coaching staff and the Lions scouting staff and Lions training staff, and I think that played some role into it. They understand what they can get. Remember, this is an off season where they're not going to have a lot to work with, player coach interactions. Sure. It's all remote right now. So getting a guy in that understands what the coaching expectations are, the coaches have a good idea of what he is, yes, okay, this is a guy that we can coach. This is a guy who will do things that we want. When you're taking a guy that late, you're looking for a guy normally who can fill one specific role on your team. And I think that in Cornell's case, they sort of want him to be that guy who can be the power end when the other team goes into a lighter package, and they want to get him a little bit of pass rush juice off the outside, but not necessarily. Okay. He's not an edge, not a stand-up edge kind of guy. He can do it, but that's not his best role. It's depth at a position where they could use some depth. He will be fighting with guys like Kevin Strong from last year, and. It's an interesting spot in Detroit because, again, we are not sure exactly what they're doing with their defense because they have given a lot of hints that they're going to use more of a traditional four-man front this year. How he fits in with that, he's probably the left defensive end there in sub packages if he makes the team. Again, your 7th-round picks, it's a coin flip. They took a guy with familiarity with big program, big game experience, and it's hard to fault them for that.
And then... Oh, by the way, if Patricia doesn't, let's say it's a bad year, and we talked about this as well on the preview show, that if Quinn and Patricia wind out on the outs, would Ryan Day be somebody that Detroit could turn to and say, "Hey, we'll give you the keys to the engine. You can run things here. You can even help pick out your own GM."
That would be an interesting one. I actually think they'd probably be more inclined to go after Urban Meyer.
You think Urban Meyer wants to coach in the NFL?
No, I don't actually. I think he's happy being where he's at right now. But his status with that changes rather quickly, as we've seen in the past.
True.
So you never know. Ryan Day would certainly be a guy that I would look at, especially if Ohio State's success continues under him. Carrying the torch that Urban lit, he will get his share of job offers and can pick whatever he wants to do. And he might want to stay at Ohio State. That's a pretty good.
Well, job. Hey, that's the whole thing. We don't know if some of these coaches, especially the young ones, maybe we thought that. I mean, we could take a look at a whole bunch of coaches, really, pick a dime a dozen that have had great careers in college, and wow, they never made, like, even a guy like Kirk Ferentz, speaking of the Big Ten, that he never went pro and just doesn't want to. It's just not in his blood for whatever reason. But
it's a very different type of job being a recruiter and a program figurehead than it is being an NFL coach. And some people are better suited for one than the other. And
ego, of course, comes into it as well.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And
it's like Lincoln Riley. I mean, we're thinking, well, this has got to be the year, right? This has got to be the year, right?
It sure seems.
Yeah,
that way.
And maybe he just doesn't want to coach in the NFL. That's possible.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
No, no, no.
If he wants to stay and be a phenomenal college football coach, God
You
bless
make
him.
a lot of money in college, and you're God in a region.
You can leave on your own terms, and that's something that very few NFL coaches ever
That's
get to
right.
do.
Okay, and the two free agents I wanted to talk about, Hunter Bryant from Washington and Jalen Elliott, the safety from Notre Dame. Bryant's the more intriguing one because he had a third-round grade at our lads and was actually the fourth rated tight end and didn't even get drafted. I got to think it's got to be a combination of his size and his health issues of why he didn't get drafted. But you're talking about a guy that overall, like Arled says, above average athlete, route runner, and ball catcher. He had 825 yards last year on 52 receptions. And Washington is not a pass first team, so very surprising that he was available as a free agent.
Very much so. And tight end they took a tight end in the first round last year in TJ Hawkinson and a seventh rounder in Isaac Nauta. Hawkinson is going to be great. I have no doubt about that. Will he ever live up to the first round? We'll see. But he got hurt, and after that, it was really rough. Jesse James was not good. Nauta and Logan Thomas tried to do their best, but they could use some depth at that position.
Yes.
So getting a guy who can reliably catch passes in the slot in that intermediate range, flexed out. He's not a blocker. They're not going to ask him to block. I don't think that's his role. He can make this team.
Yeah.
And if you're an undrafted free agent and making the team, that good on you.
Well,
man.
we talked about that. We talked about the two tight end offense that Bevel likes to run. We talked about losing Thomas, that chances were at some point in the draft they were going to take a tight end, and to be able to I could imagine they were probably talking to him, I would think, at some point around the 6th, 7th round. They were probably already on the phone with him going, hey, we want to sign you if we don't draft you.
Yeah, absolutely. And they did a good job of making sure that he was their priority free agent. He has the best chance of making the team of all the undrafted free agents.
Oh, yeah.
And it honestly would surprise me if he doesn't at least stick around on the practice squad and be one of those guys. As you know, they have the 53 to 55 this year where you can send the guy up and down from the practice squad. Wouldn't surprise me at all if he's that guy this year. And that's great for an undrafted player.
And I don't know about Jalen Elliott because he was a fringe draftable guy, but still draftable grade of potentially a 7th rounder and a Notre Dame guy. So, but he's one of these long shot players that will be lucky to make the team. More than likely, he'll be lucky to be a practice squad player, and hopefully that's where he starts his career.
Yeah, those guys, specifically reserve defensive backs, reserve receivers, they have to make it on special teams. If he can play special teams, there's a chance he could crack the role. The Lions are very deep at safety. They're very good at safety too. I don't think that gets appreciated enough. If Will Harris, their third-round pick from last year, can step up with Tracy Walker and Deron Harmon, that's a really good safety combination. You've got two really good corners in Trufant and Okudah. That's the makings of a great secondary. So there's not a lot of room there. Elliott's going to be fighting against guys like Miles Killebrew. There's a couple of guys that played last year as well that got some look on special teams and didn't hurt. So he's up against a numbers game, but again, special teams will be his key if he wants to make it.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, that's where his best write-up was at our lads at the Senior Bowl practices. He played the deep hole and in the box, and that's what he did also in college. So he could play both safety roles, but he showed excellent range in pursuit and was around the ball a lot, tackled well with finish, matched tight ends one-on-one, mirroring route breaks and playing tight coverage. So he did get a good write-up as far as his notes at the Senior Bowl, which is encouraging for his opportunity to be, like you said, special teams player first. And maybe he'll crack the lineup if things go really well. And he's another Notre Dame player, so nothing wrong with that, right?
And you got some proximity there. You got some knowledge because there are some Notre Dame guys on the roster already. That fits. They did sign a long snapper as well, which is it's a bit of a big deal in Detroit because Don Muhlbach has been here since 2005.
Okay.
Death taxes and Don Muhlbach. They challenged him once before in Bob Quinn's first draft. They actually drafted Jimmy Landis out of Baylor. He lasted about 2 weeks in camp, and it's like, you know what? This Muhlbach guy's pretty good. So they're trying to keep Dandy down a little sharp.
Right.
He's not in danger of losing his job. You got to mention it though, because it is a thing in Detroit.
Okay.
So we have an odd affinity for our long snapper here.
You would know. That's why we have you on, Jeff, to talk about long snappers with the Lions. Every little detail is necessary.
Actually, so that does bring it. They did sign Aaron Sipos from the Australian punter from Auburn.
Okay.
Sam Martin is a free
That's
agent.
right.
He's gone.
Yes.
He's in Denver. So it's the Sipos, who was a former Australian rules football professional player before he went to Auburn, against Jack Fox, who was here on the practice squad last year. We'll see who wins on that. Whoever can kick off better. Matt Prater's a great field goal kicker. He cannot kick off. He doesn't like to do it. So it's as much about who can handle the kickoff and holding duties as it is for punting prowess. So but Sipos has a very good shot at making a name for himself too.
Jeff, appreciate it as always. We look forward to talking to you hopefully soon, because that means that training camp will start sooner than later.
Yeah.
And we all hope that is the case. Good luck with the podcast as well. Again, all you got to do is type in Detroit Lions podcast. You might even be able to get away with just Detroit Lions, and your podcast is right there. So that's pretty awesome. And and it's great to have you on again, filling in with everything going on with the Detroit Lions, including who their long snapper might be for 2020. So that's awesome.
That's right. Thanks so much for having me on. It was my
pleasure.
got
it, Jeff. Great job as always. Thank you.